And where the bodies lay, the red flower arises as a sign and signal that they will never be forgotten. I'm a white woman of British heritage, born on the Dharawal land near Appin, where the first sanctioned massacres happened in 1816. And like many of us here, I discovered later in my life and well beyond my formal education that fragments of our history lay buried under the ground where we could not see. And it stopped us from hearing and seeing a true perspective of who we are as a nation. But we are stepping into change now. These are good times. It's a great time of hope for Australia, for that which has been prized away from our history is bubbling to the surface, and in some ways, not so well. On many fronts, we are a nation in search of ourselves and of integrity, of righteous action towards the other, towards our neighbour. This is especially felt as we move towards a possible voice to Parliament for our Indigenous people. If anyone would like to talk more about this after the service, I have a lot to say coming from some of our Indigenous elders who are peacemakers and are calling for the voice. We are at last adjusting the sails of those tall ships that came into the harbour in 1788 to strike a better line, a higher truth. And the world is watching us. I spoke recently with an Islamic scholar visiting this land, and he put a question to me, and he said this: how can Australians welcome and embrace those from across the sea as enshrined in your anthem, when they who have resided in these lands and are the oldest continuing culture on the earth are struggling to find their way home? This is especially true for the disenfranchised ones that are currently running amok without a vision in Alice Springs. And there's a story there. But as we come to the gospel today, can I put a question to you? Why are you here this morning? Why am I here? There could be as many answers to that question as there are individuals in front of me. Deep down, I think the bedrock of why you and I are here is because we come to this place in search of wholeness, in search of authenticity. We come to this beautiful place to centre ourselves, to stop and listen for a word or an unspoken word that might call us back to our Creator and to ourselves. Maybe the familiar rhythms and colour of these sacred liturgies are a kind of coming home. And authenticity is waiting to greet us here in the words of today's gospel. Because right here and right now in this moment, we are in the middle of the Sermon on the Mount. And it's a tough reading. I think you'd agree with me. At first glance, it appears that Jesus has raised the bar so high that none of us would ever have a hope of making it into the kingdom of heaven. The common refrain is, "You have heard it said, but now I say to you," it's even tougher. "Do not murder." Well, that's doable. But who has not harboured disdain or hatred for another in their heart. Fail. Luther held that the law and its impossible standards drove us to grace. Like prodigals at the end of ourselves, we rise up to return to the Father, who, by the way, we hear, has already set out on the road to rescue us. And there is truth in that. But dig deeper in this reading. What if Jesus is calling us to live more authentically, calling us back to ourselves? And we are reminded that authenticity is not a solo journey. It involves being able to see the face of the other, to love our neighbour. The poor old Pharisees are on the receiving end again in this treatise. They're in the background. They had lost sight of themselves, and their religious practices had become incompatible with a living faith. And they had substituted that faith for a system of rules by which they were enabled to believe that they might serve God and mammon. They had removed the sacred heart of flesh from within themselves and replaced it with stone. No longer shepherds of the people, Jesus refers to them as blind guides, broods of vipers and whitewashed tombs. Not a pretty sight. And he places their shortcomings on display. They are held up as the perfect example of what not to do. The inside didn't match the outside. Miriam Ungunama-Borman, last year's Senior Australia of the Year, says that it's now time for our nation to go to deep listening. To listen not only on the outside but on the inside. And from the Benedictine tradition, we hear, listen with the ear of your heart. For once upon a time, and I now quote from Eleanor Dark's Timeless Land. Once upon a time, they who settled here from afar were unable to see and hear that the inside did not match the outside. They came across the sea to these bounteous lands and took at will that which was not theirs. Under a foundational Judeo-Christian law, they were able to say devoutly in one section, "Thou shalt not kill," while from another, they were able to make plausible justifications for massacre. They were able to proclaim, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, but bend all energies to building power and dominion. To extol mercy, but be merciless. To preach kindness, but be brutal. To praise truth and practice deceit, and yet still be able to regard their society with sincere complacency." Those voices are not our voices. We were not there. Those voices are silent now. But our voices are not. And neither are the voices of our First Nations people. Because whether we like it or not, you and I live and move and have our being on the back of this history, and because many, both Indigenous and non-Indigenous, paid the ultimate sacrifice. We are on a journey back towards one another, and it will be a severe mercy. When interior actions and attitudes and love and acceptance and trust and grace, when these are attended to and are presented to God, then there is a transformation in our thinking and our behaviour. And we have just witnessed this transformation at the Australian War Memorial, who will now include the narrative of the Frontier Wars within those hallowed walls. But we as a nation have still not come forward with a method of commemoration, and Making Peace is working down in those trenches with our children and across the land with a commemorative flower, individual and corporate, to commemorate, without perpetrator and without victim. I'm going to end with 2 short sentences from 2 desert fathers. But these are not the ancient ones that we might be thinking of. These 2 desert fathers are in Alice Springs right now, or perhaps Jumpy Jimpers in Yuendumu. They are peacemakers. They are mentors for the Making Peace ministry. Peltara Angalinga Angamora, Chris Tomlins, Aranda Elder, Snake Gully, Mbandwa, Alice Springs. This is a great gathering statement, and it is a little shocking. We are all stolen generation. For me, and this is speaking of Chris, my land, life, culture and children were stolen. But for you, settler mob, something equally precious has been stolen from you: the truth. We are all stolen generation. It is time to walk together to build a golden generation, especially for our emerging youth, who through education and learning to understand our full history can be equipped to lead us into a future where respect is for all, for those who came first and for us who came after. And from Warlpiri Elder, Jumpy Jimper, Ned Hargraves. From the central western Tanami Desert, Yuendumu, a man of faith, he says, I open this statement with my language. Garanjala, Murajari. This powerful phrase is used when someone breaks the law and betrays something that is sacred. In our language, it means this must never happen again. These, for us, are the same words that Jesus used on the cross. Karanjala, Murajari, it is finished. Blessed are they who mourn, for they shall be comforted. And blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. Amen.